let's go live and see what happens. All right, welcome back. We are COMP397 in the winter 2021 semester, and it is week 3, part 1 of our broadcast. We're going to be talking about Blender right now, materials, textures, and UV mapping starting off in a second. But first, let's take a look at where we are, what we did last week, and what we're doing going forward. So I've got about 26 of you, it looks like, online with me for a total of 27 on this call. And we had a pretty good call on Friday, I think. There's quite a few questions about the assignment. And I think what's going to happen is we're going to continue to run it that way. So what did we do last week? Last week we had assignment 1, part 1 was due on Sunday. So hopefully you had a chance to submit that. Again, that was the first part, which is more planning and asset gathering than anything else. So that's what it was about. We also did lab 2, which where we created a small example of a character model, and we did it first. We actually created also a bit of a tile in Blender for the first time. We worked at Blender, so we did a bit of the Blender hour, I think. We started off with Blender, and then we pushed everything into Unity, and we did the rest with Unity, which was we kind of created a kind of a small game, a very small kind of scene with Unity. Talked about physics, rigid bodies, colliders, and a bunch of different things at a very high level last week, and we're going to continue with that stuff. Again, the assumption is that most of you are not gaming students, so I'm going to cater to the majority. For the people that are gaming students, sit back. You'll still get a lot out of this, I think. It's just a matter of it'll be a little bit more basic than you're used to. If you already know Unity and you're out there and you're listening and watching, that's fantastic. I think you're going to continue to add to what we're talking about this semester. So what are we doing this week? This week's lab 3, we're going to start with Blender. We're going to start with a mesh. We're going to download a little bit of a texture, and we're going to be talking about basic materials and textures and how to do something called UV mapping. All right, so that's something we're going to be doing today. In Unity, we're going to be talking about the built-in render pipeline. There's currently 3 pipelines that Unity supports. And think about a pipeline as a workflow in terms of how you do your drawing in Unity. And we'll talk about what those are. I'm also going to introduce the notion of lighting and what that is really, what that is. Anatomy of a light, the component, shadows, skyboxes, and we're going to do some simple scene management. We're also going to build our project to WebGL and deploy to GitHub pages. So those are a lot of things we have to do in the 2 hours or 3 hours, again, all told, that we have together. So it's a lot of stuff, and we need to get started. So, and again, we're recording today. Just to reiterate the schedule for the way we do things during the week, I record your lecture and your lab, kind of, because we're doing a lecture lab format on Mondays. You have it for the entire week to do your lab. Your lab is usually due at the end of the week, Friday or Saturday. I've made it Saturday this week as an example to give you that extra day. And then what we do is we have a couple of additional sessions on Thursday afternoon as well as Friday morning. Those sessions are asynchronous, where I make myself available for office hours. I met with a group of students on last Thursday evening. On Discord, we had some discussions about the assignment, and I answered a bunch of questions. And that's the kind of way we'll do things. If you need a tutorial, I've also met with some students individually, in terms of they want to see if a game concept was viable, and I met with a couple of them. And we talked about some animations and so on. And then on Friday afternoon, we do an interactive session. It's not the same as I'm doing right now. I think that I kind of went over the same material. But my ask of you, if you're watching this video, is make sure you go through the whole thing. And then Friday, if you want to connect with me, you'll have some questions that we can ask, and I'll kind of answer the questions live on Friday afternoon between 1:30 and 4:30. And again, we'll kind of go through that every single week in order for you guys to be at the same level. Sometimes I'll record things on Fridays as well. Chances are I won't, only because I want the majority to have everything, kind of at the very beginning of the week, so that people, at the beginning of the week have the same experience as the people at the end of the week. So that's the structure we're going to continue with. So what's due is, it says lab 3 is this Friday. I've kind of changed it to this Saturday. So that is just, I looked at the schedules and what you're working with right now, and I think you need the extra day. Assignment 1 part 2 has been released last week, and this is where you actually have to have some movement and some other things working. And I've kind of detailed a lot of that stuff last week, and that is due next week. And I think I made all the assignments due Sundays at midnight to give you that extra couple days, as opposed to making it to at the end of the week. So that's where we are. Next week, we're going to be talking about the anatomy of a camera. So today we're talking about lights. Next time we're talking about camera, and the difference between perspective and orthographic, as well as adding additional control with Cinemachine, which we're going to be talking about probably next week. So I'll just put that in. I'll call it Cinemachine, because Cinemachine is another component we can add in, or a structure, if you will, to make it easier for cameras and everything else. We'll also talk about different kinds of perspectives for character controllers next week. So we're sitting here at week 3 again, and as you see in the structure, lab 4 is next week, as well as assignment 1 part 2 due at the end of the week on Sunday, and then we're going to release the final part for the WebGL piece, assignment 1 part 3, which will be due at week 7, way down there. So that'll be by week 7, you'll have your first iteration, if you will, of a working game. Most of the components will be in place. There'll be some things that still have to be done by the end of semester, but for the most part, you'll have something that you can show other people, pretty much by week 4, and then more certainly by week 7. All right, so that's something that we're working towards, one step at a time. So that's where we are right now. Okay, so what we're going to do first is we're going to start, again with, let's duplicate our project from last week and get Unity ready, but we'll start in Blender. So that's the first piece. So last week, and again, if we kind of, stretch back a little bit, if we go back to last week's bit of code, I'm just going to bring that up here for a second off screen, and then I'll bring it on screen just a second. So one thing we were developing was we had a little project that we were running in Unity, and we kind of talked about how to set up your project. And for people who were new at this, that's okay. We kind of put together this little project right here. So lesson 2A, and I want to continue with lesson 2, the build that we did last week, so we don't kind of lose track. But in order for me to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to GitHub and start from there. So just let's go to GitHub together. So if you go to github.com and / Centennial College, then you'll see lesson 2A. I'm going to start with this one, and the way I'm going to do that is to download right from the zip file. So please follow me here and do this first. So I'm going to download this, and I'm going to download the zip just like we normally do. And I'm going to pass the zip file into onto my desktop, similar to this, like we did last time. So there it is. For you, if you wait for a second, I'll have a starter for you ready to go. Or you can follow along and kind of do what I do. It's up to you. But I'm going to unzip this thing. So I'm going to unzip it here. It says 2A main. Usually main is the branch. I'm going to convert this to 3A. And I say A because I may have another one later on. That's why I'm using that convention. For those people who are watching me live, I'm just going to cut out here from a camera perspective and bring my camera up on the YouTube side. All right, so let's go there and do that. So hello for those people who are on YouTube. Welcome. Let's go into this. So here is lesson 3A. And the challenge is that right now there's no GitHub repository. I remember last week what we did was we used Gitkraken for that. So I recommended Gitkraken. So here it is. Let's bring that up. So Gitkraken is just a visual tool. Sure. It's just a visual tool for connecting. And last week we had this file structure. Remember what we did last time is we added a new tab. That's what we did with Gitkraken. And what I want to do is I want to start a local repo again. So I'm starting a local repo based on the old one. I don't want to start a hosted repo on GitHub or anything like that. I want to start locally and then work remotely. So start a local repo. It's going to take me to Centennial, right, like we have. So this will be my outer folder. And now you can clearly see that I have 3A. That's what I want to call my lesson. So I'm going to do that today. So I'm going to call that right here. So COMP397, winter 2021 semester, and it's lesson 3A. It's very important to get this exactly the same. Main branch. I already have a gitignore file locally, so I'm not going to add a new one because I already have one. And I'm going to click Create Repository, which is just going to take my original file. So inside of COMP397 lesson 3A, if I look in there now, you see that there's a hidden .git folder like we talked about in the first days. Right, that hidden .git folder is a good, it gives me an indication that I've just done my work to start things off in Gitkraken. All right, cool. I need still to add in the project. So I have all these changes, 58 changes. I already have a gitignore file, so it picked up the fact that I don't want a library folder. So that's good. Let's stage all changes. And then I'm just going to say added project files. And that's kind of my standard. Hey, we got our initial commit right there. And the second thing I'm doing is adding all the project files for the previous week. And we'll keep doing this week over week so that you see the workflow that I'm using. So I'm going to click commit changes to 58 files. Cool. So I've got that latest commit, which is added project files. And now what I want to do is push. And it's going to ask me, hey, we don't have a local remote. Do you want to make one? Yes, I do. And it's going to, with permissions, it's going to go up to my GitHub account, which is Centennial College. And it's going to kind of create this new repository name of COMP397 W2021 lesson 3A. So that is your starter. All right. So I'm going to post this up on eCentennial in a second. So let's create remote and push. And if everything goes well, you're going to see that there's going to be a little message that comes up that shows me this project. Also notice that main and locally, and which is this part, and remote, which is this part, origin is in sync, which is important. So let's just put that back. And if I go back to Centennial, you can see now that I have 3A, and that's the project that I want to put up. But one thing that we didn't change is the README file, which says COMP397 W2021 lesson 2A. Let's change that up online to show you the difference. Again, I can just go in here and change this to 3A and commit the changes. When I do that now, what's going to happen is, unfortunately, I'm a commit ahead, and you can't tell. Gitkraken doesn't know about that because it's not in real-time connection. There's no real-time connection between Gitkraken and GitHub, right? But it does occasionally check to see what's going on. And if you notice, there's a pull, but I can also do a fetch. And a fetch is a non-destructive kind of check to see if there's something that's online that's different than what we have locally. So if I do this, it clearly shows that main on the remote branch is ahead because it updated the README file of main on the local branch, which is behind. So now what I want to do is I want to pull to synchronize that. So if I click pull, it says, yes, I want to pull this. And now they're synchronized together. My local README file is the same as it was online. Okay, that's kind of a thing we had to do. Okay, cool. So that now we're ready to go with that piece. And that was the first piece, which is I kind of created that. I want to get this link to this and put it up on eCentennial for you guys if you're watching. So again, it's going to be under content. And if you go to week 3, where it says lighting in 3D, there's going to be a GitHub repos subfolder. And I'm going to populate this inside of this place. So I'll say week 3 starter repo. And that'll be the same repository that you're going to be using for the entire week in terms of getting your lab 3 done. All right. So open as external resource. You'll have a link to mine where you can download mine and you're ready to go. Okay. And it's just all it is just 2A with so far with the README file that's changed. So what I ask you to do is as we're continuing, I want you to take a look at what I've done and compare my stuff to yours. I don't expect you to hand me back something that you're just not going to hand me back my own code. Please don't do that. The exercise is you trying to figure out stuff on your own and how to make sure you practice and all that stuff as we continue to go forward. Okay, so that is where we're starting today. And let's continue. So I'm going to bring up Blender, and I want to talk about adding a shape to Blender that is, we're going to start with some basics, and then I'm going to talk about how we can apply that to one of the tiles, making a new tile that we did before. So remember last week in Blender, and this is the Blender hour. So you can see that I've got Blender 2.91.2. I'm using the old shortcuts, and I've got a cube. This time, I'm not going to delete the cube. What I want to do instead is I want to just make some changes to the cube in terms of the way it looks. So I'm going to just stretch it. So I'm going to go on the left here where we have some controls, and I'm going to go to where it says scale. I only want to scale across the z-axis, and I want to do it numerically. So instead of me doing it like by eye, which is what I'm doing here, I'm going to bring up the numeric transform, and you can get to it by actually going here. There's a little arrow on the right hand side where you can pick up the transform. So notice that if I scale it up, it scales to a z axis, a z. And what I want to do here is move it up so that it has an exact size as opposed to me guessing what it is. So let's move this to something like 5 meters. So you can see that that is exactly 5 meters high on the z-axis. That's what it is. Also notice that the local scale has been changed to 2.5. All right, so that is something that's different because it's 2.5 times larger than normal. Also, you can see that if I look at it from the side, that this little object I have, as an example, is also in the ground. It looks like here's the ground plane, and it's half in and half out of the ground. I want to move this up half the distance so that it sits on the ground plane, especially when we look at it from Unity's perspective. So right now, from a location perspective, let's change our target. So let's see if I change it over here on the left-hand side to move. You can also use the G key if you're using the same control keys I am, shortcut keys. But we're going to grab the widget that is this widget control that comes up, and we're going to just move it up by eye first so that it looks like it's approximately at the right place. Notice that I moved it up the same amount that I scaled it up, pretty much half the height of the object. If my total height is 5 meters, then I'm going to move it up exactly 2.5 meters as from a numeric transform perspective. So now you can see that it's clearly sitting on the ground plane. Okay, which is, there's no ground plane, it's just a grid right now, but we can see it's like that, it's sitting right there. A couple of things I'm going to need just for testing, and then we'll get rid of them later, is we have this light and we have this camera, and later on what we're going to do is we're going to remove those from the scene, and so we don't have to import them into Unity. We're also going to zero out or apply the transformations this time around, so we don't have a transformation that is adjusted. So now notice the scale is 2.5 and my location is 2.5. I want to zero those out so that when it comes into Unity, those are 0 and 1 as a scale. So that's what I want to do. We'll talk about that later. It's not a cube. Let's make this kind of we'll call this a pillar of some kind. So on the right-hand side in the inspector, we just double-click and call this pillar. So we know what it is. That's just what I'm going to make, a pillar. Stone pillar with maybe some stone on it, all right? So there's a couple things to note about this structure. So here I'm actually dealing with the geometry. So I modified the geometry, and if I tab into edit mode, and again, you can get to edit mode by tabbing in, so you can see the vertices, or on the left-hand side where you go to edit mode, you can go to object mode. So edit mode or object mode on the left, right? I want to go to edit mode for a second. You see that all I've done is I have the same vertices. I haven't moved those. I've just stretched the line segment between the bottom verts, excuse me, and the top face, right? As an example, it's stretched out so that it is modified. Okay, that's all I've done. Cool. Let's go back into object mode. So I'm just going to click this and go back into object mode. Nothing has changed there. One thing to note is whenever we pull in a texture, we won't be able to see it by default. And I'll talk about why, because on the top right here, you can see that we're in viewport shading mode. I can also go into wireframe mode. That's up here, okay? But over here, what we see is our viewport shading mode is not shaded by default. If I click on this viewport shading mode, we'll see that it looks different. It's a little brighter than what it was before. Why? Because if I look here on the right-hand side where my tabs are, there's a tab. You can see that this color, this base color, and we're using something called principled BSDF. You refer to my slides. Let me see what it says, right? So if I go back to my slides, one thing to note is inside of my slides, I have some examples of what I want you to do with Blender and what those things mean. So notice there's shadows here. I got some separators for those. This is materials. And down in here, there is a Blender materials area that I've got. And it's around page 47 as a reference. I kind of put together a little bit of a reference book for you today. And one thing that we're going to be talking about is this idea of the type of material that we're going to be using. And here's some terminology for you. BSDF is bidirectional scattering distribution function. That's what it is. It's just a name of how the shader and the materials work together. And we also have a principled volume. That's what it is, which is something that you're going to be seeing. So here's an example of a principled volume, which is something that is using something called physical-based or physically based rendering, or PBR. So it creates, uses a texture that, gives us an effect of how things work. And I'll talk about this in a second. Again, follow me. Don't worry about understanding absolutely everything right now. But I've put some information here from about slide 47 on the slides that I put up till about slide 55 around Blender and materials and shaders. So that's where we're at right now. So one thing we're doing is we have a material slot that we're using. And a material, if you think about what it is if I go back up right to the top, it talks about materials as data blocks in Blender that can be assigned to one or more objects. Okay, that's really what it is. Think about it as a skin that wraps around an object, and it really connects a couple things. The shader program that is associated with the object. And I want you to think about a shader as a mathematical algorithm that allows us to display things like the quality of the light that you're seeing. There is no light, not really. We'll talk about that. But you're seeing a light type effect on a model, and it has to do with the shader that's associated with it. So by default, if I go back to Blender, and don't worry again if you don't understand, by default this is a principled volume, BSDF surface. That's what it is, right? And notice I have a couple things. I have a base color, a subsurface, and a bunch of other stuff. What you can do to simplify things for you is where it says click nodes or use nodes, click on that. And you can see that it doesn't use nodes. This is kind of the simplest way of looking at a shader as an example that's attached to the material. So material is still a principled BSDF, but what's happening is that I'm only seeing some basic things. And one of them is this base color. Okay, right now I'm going to keep it at the base color. I'm not changing that at all. But that's kind of the first thing. It also talks about specularity, and I want you to think about specularity as reflectivity, if you will, as well as metallic, which is the metallic nature of the material that we're talking about. Right now it's 0. So if I wanted to make it more metallic looking, add a metalness to it, then I could increase that value. There's also a roughness, and I can increase or decrease that value to make it look like it's going to, like it should look. Okay, there's other options here too, but the ones I want you to recognize are that I've got a material that has a certain color that I've applied it to, and this is the base color, and the base color is something that we can add on, and we can modify, we can layer color on top of this one, so to create an effect that we want. All right, so I got an object. I have to have a mesh first, which is what I have. A mesh is just a series of vertices, edges, faces, normals, as well as UV coordinates. That's what I have. And here what I have is a mesh, which is just a polygonal object, right? It looks like some kind of, rectangular polygon equivalent, right? That is slightly, it's not quite a cube because we've stretched it up. And if I go into edit mode again, you can see that it retains kind of the base color, and I can still see the vertices here. So that's kind of what we're looking at. Again, if some of this terminology is foreign to you or it seems intimidating, don't worry about it. It's not meant for you to be intimidated in any way. I'm just going through it. Eventually you'll understand as you continue to hear stuff. the same terminology over and over again, kind of, we discuss it together. So here we are. Let's go back into Blender, and I'm going to tab back out of edit mode into object mode. In object mode, we actually can move things around and lay our scene out. Edit mode, we modify our objects like we said last time. Okay, cool. So we've got this thing, and now is a perfect opportunity for us to do something called UV unwrapping, right? But before that, we need to get a texture. And just like I said online in the materials in my PowerPoint, let's go to that PowerPoint. And if I go way to the top where I kind of talk about what I'm going to be doing today, there is, we start with a mesh, which is what we've done so far. And then what I'm doing is I'm downloading a texture, right? Again, this is on page 3 of the PowerPoint that I uploaded this week. And you can go to something called texturescom to see if we can get one. So I'm going to go up on, let's bring up a new tab. I'm going to go to texturescom. And textures.com, I've signed up for textures.com. So you're going to see this view. But really what you normally see as an example is home. You see this view here. And textures.com, it used to be called different things in the past. I think it's a great, they bought the name textures.com eventually. Which is cool. You can browse the library. So this is all the library of all the different textures, and they give you some example textures on the right. So example things like street, cobblestone, soil, and so on. This is kind of something, these are physically based PBR textures. And they also talk about, how to use them. So I want you to look at these things and really what they are when you think about textures that I'm going to apply to an object. I want you to think about them as just a bitmap. So just a bitmap, and normally they're flat as an example. So if I click on one of these, let's say, for example, I want a cobblestone column or something like that, or an asphalt column with cracks in it, or some kind of, wall. And on the left, you can see some examples of options you have to select stuff, right? You can also search. So if I want to search for, a wall, I can do so. I can search for a wall, and it'll bring up some examples of walls. So there's a mixed cobblestone kind of structure. There's also a stone wall and a bunch of stuff like that. And I like this stone wall because it looks like there is additional geometry here. And it's a little lighter, which goes along with what we're doing. It's a 16K texture, 16K plus. We don't need all that quality. Let's click in there and see what's happening. Again, I went to textures.com, I went to home, and I went to browse library. You can do this even if you're not registered. And then you can just search for wall. And if you search for wall, again, you'll see this mixed cobblestone wall. And if you go down, there's a stone wall that I'm looking at, stone wall 2. I'm going to click on stone wall 2. When I do so, it's going to bring up some examples of some textures. Now, this is what I'm hoping the texture is going to look like on our object. You can see that there is a little bit what looks like more volume. And we're going to talk about this in a second and how it's actually going to look. So there's some options. So you notice that it says 1 credit free, and that's a 512 by 512, or half a kind of a 0.5K texture. That's what that is. This is a 1K texture, right? And if you want something more of quality, then you got to pay for premium. We don't need to pay for premium. You know what? Our 1K texture is probably going to go a long way to make it very interesting. Also note that on the right-hand side, there's also a normal map, right? And we'll talk about what this is. There's a displacement map as well as roughness. So you have all these different things that they've created for us, which is fantastic. We can always download each of these if you want, and we will. But each of these maps kind of work together to create, an effect with our geometry. For now, let's just download this one. So that is a 1024 by 1024, where it says 1 credit free. So I'm going to click on this and download. It's going to ask me to do that. I've used the credit, right? And I'm going to put this on my download. So it's called textures.com wall stone albedo, which is the normal. And it also says tip, which is the file type tip. Okay, so that's it could be a JPEG as well, other things like that, or even PNG. TIFF is the raw file, and that's going to be my 1K file that I'm going to put on here. So I'm going to save that just on my in downloads right now. So save. And so now that I have this download, let's put this up on Blackboard so you have it as well. Blackboard. eCentennial, my head. Sorry, lots of stuff going on. All right, so if I go to, if I go back to our force, so let's go into our, for our Git repository, right, where our Git repository is. And there's also our lecture material, course lecture. I'm going to put in the link for this up on eCentennial for you to grab. So I'm going to kind of upload a new file. And one thing to do, what I can do with eCentennial is just drag and drop it into there, and it'll create that file for me. All right, so now you should have it up on eCentennial. It's called texturescom wall stone 2, a 3x3 with a 1K kind of texture albedo. So you can download that too. So if you don't have an account, or if you just want to try this out, it's free. It's kind of fair use. It's just for education purposes. So we're just going to download this textures, and it's just for you guys. Okay, so once we've got that texture, I want to be able to apply it to this, right? And right now it looks funny. It's just a very simple block. That's what it looks like. And none of that additional geometry is appearing here. And you're like, wait, how does this work? How do I get a texture that looks really rocky and everything else? How can I put it on here so it looks realistic? How does that work? Well, let me show you the next part. So the next part is on the top, you have something called layout. So this is like different options. So there's layout, there's modeling. That's modeling. It takes us right into edit mode. Sculpting, which allows me to sculpt a texture. We don't want that. UV editing is where I want to go. And when I click on UV editing, because this material, and if I click on the material itself, because this material has it's already been unwrapped, as an example, and we'll talk about unwrapping in a second, you can see that my shape that I see here looks like an unwrapped cube. Okay, this is fantastic, but it's not going to work for us. And it's not going to work for us because our object is not a cube exactly. So if I was to do that, some of these, let me just deselect everything. If I select the whole thing again, you can see that something is wrong, right? The face on the top, so if I deselect all, and if I select the top face, I'm just going to click into face select mode and select the top face. The top face here is going to show me the face that is in what we call a UV map. And a UV map is like a flat 2D texture. And it's almost like I want you to imagine I have a texture that's in 2D and I want to wrap it around an object that's in 3D. Good example of that is my PowerPoint that I kind of put in here, where I showed you what a texture might look like. Again, if you scroll down past somewhere in that range of 47 on page 57 of my PowerPoint slide, this is an example of what UV mapping is. I have some kind of texture image. I've got a UV map, which is basically a grid that defines how my texture which is a bitmap, is going to wrap around my surface. So my surface, in this case, is a sphere. And what I'm doing is I'm using a different kinds of projection. So when it comes to just a box, it's just like, think about me as taking a cardboard box. So going back to the Blender, I've taken a cardboard box that's just in this shape, let's suppose. And what I'm doing is I'm slicing it at some certain seams, and I'm opening up the box flat. And then what I do is I draw on the box. And when I draw on the box and I put the box back together, then whatever I've drawn on the box, it appears on the surface. That is, in many ways, how we do texture mapping. And when I say texture mapping, is what we do is we get a sample of the texture that appears on the left so that we can color the object on the right. Okay, and I've chosen to elongate this object to give us a challenge, which is what I wanted to do. One thing we don't have is we don't have a texture associated with this thing at all. And right now, if I was to select everything on the right-hand side, again, the way I got this split view is I'm on the top where it says layout, modeling, sculpting, UV editing. I'm in the UV editing mode up here on the top, UV editing mode. Okay, it's a different workspace that adjusts my workspace. So I have kind of a UV map on the left and a model that's in edit mode on the right. Okay, so it's kind of immediate. So notice edit mode on the right. I didn't do anything. I just switched layouts. And then I have this happening on the right-hand side. So texture will be appearing here on the left. And then on the right is where my UV model is going to be, my model. So what is UV anyway? What does UV mean? And again, if I go back to my PowerPoint, right into this, like what is UV mapping? Well, I want you to think about it as U and V refer to a 2D coordinate space. We don't want to use X's and Y's because X and Y is taken. It means X and Y positions. So instead, what we do is we use a different set of letters, U for X and V for the Y coordinate of my texture. So this is my texture map. Think about it as a flattened out, texture that I'm going to have eventually. And I want to have coordinate space. There's a coordinate here, and it's going to map to coordinates over here. For example, this face right here maps 1-to-1 with this face right here, and it's proportional, right? However, we're going to have problems with this face. As you can see that this is elongated long, and this is not proportional. So we need to re-unwrap everything so that on the left looks like more of what we see on the right. When we see unwrap, we need to take the box or the mesh and open it up, lay it flat, and create a mapping, a 1-to-1 mapping function from the left to the right. Okay, so let me do this with you now. Let's unwrap it again. There's a bunch of ways to do this. So first of all, let's select all. So if I go to select and I click all, you can see that these are all selected. And over here, when your mouse is on this side of the screen or on this side of the screen, it does different things. So once I move over here, you can see that the screen gets highlighted differently. So here, I'm acting on this side of the screen. If I select all here, so again, you can go here, select all or select none. If I select all, I'm actually selecting my UV map. Here, I'm actually selecting my objects geometry on the right-hand side. Here, I'm just the UV map selected. Okay, so you can see that this is the case. But this doesn't track, it doesn't map 1-to-1, right? So let's re-unwrap this. I need to be on the right-hand side with my mouse and press U for unwrap. You can also, if U is not the key for you because you're using different shortcut keys, press the space bar. If you do your search and you type unwrap, you can see that I need to press U for me. That's my shortcut key. Yours will be different. One thing to note is that it's going to try and unwrap it based on the different things, right? Angle-based or whatever, right? And let me undo that change. If I press U, I get different options. So U is just the unwrap, regular unwrap. UV mapping is what we want. So let's try this again. So if I press space and I type in UV, right? And I start typing mapping, right? And now it says mark seam. There's smart UV project. That's one option, right? As well as some of the other options that I have. So if I just type UV, then there's different kinds of projections we can use. So we can use some kind of cube-like projection, right? So again, if I press U, you can see that I have a cube projection. If I click cube projection, then I get, well, something weird happens on the left-hand side, right? It's like all of the layers get kind of wrapped on top of each other. And what I mean by that is we have different things on the left. So let's just undo these changes on the left. And I can also unwrap. So if I choose the top face, here's the top face, right? Or the left face or the right face, it's all layered on top of each other right now. They're all kind of layered on top. So that's one way of doing it. So let's select all again. So you can see the effects of this on the left, right? Select all. So everything's selected. And let's unwrap again. So unwrap. And instead of doing a cube projection, right? Let's do a smart UV project, right? So if I do that and I just choose the basic options, I don't modify any of these things, I press OK, now we get something that looks like this. Again, not really right, right? Not really right because if I choose a face, right, this face is wrongly proportioned to the map that I'm seeing on the left. Okay, just showing you how we can do it here. So this is another way of unwrapping. Let's do it again. So again, I can unwrap many times. Every time I unwrap, I just change the coordinate space that I'm seeing on my left, but maps to the right. Okay, this is before we even bring in a texture. Okay, so this is this part right here. Let's try it again. So again, I'm pressing U for unwrap, and you can see where it says follow active quads. Let's try this one. So follow active quads, and now we get something that looks like we had before, which is like a little open T, but again, we have a stretched object here and a stretched object here, and it says length is average. We can also go length as an example too, to see what it looks like. Really not what we're looking for. Let's try it again. So again, unwrap. I'm showing you different ones, right? Cylinder projection, that's wacky. Unwrap again. Sphere projection, wacky. Let's unwrap again. Project from view. Let's do project from bounds. Project from bounds. So this is like the bounding area. It almost looks like I'm looking at it in 3 dimensions, right? Project from bounds. Unwrap. We can also project from view. And that is probably the closest we're getting so far to our to kind of a proportional look and feel, right, from one thing to the other. This is not exactly what we want, because what we have is overlapping what we call islands. And when I say islands, it's like every time I create a part of a texture, so for example, I have the top and the left and the right, those aren't overlapping. But the problem is the bottom, if I click on the bottom, now that overlaps. So there's an overlapping part. Remember, think about me using the same texture on the background and applying it to what I see on the right, okay? And look, it changed. If I do this, if I move my view and I press unwrap, project from view, now that's gonna be different again. So that's kind of a limitation on what we can see. So that definitely there's different options. The other one is just unwrap, right? And what unwrap does is it tries its best to take the view the way it is right here and unwrap it here on the left-hand side. Again, it's not doing a great job of doing it on its own, okay? So we need to give it a little bit of help, and we're gonna do that right now. But first, it's really hard to picture what the heck I'm talking about until you actually have a texture. So let's go back into our modeling mode just for a second, and I wanna go into object mode. And on the right, there's this little button underneath, or tab underneath the materials tab. So here's the tab right here. And notice I don't have a texture slot. I have a material, there's my material, but I don't have a texture. Without a texture slot, I can't really load a texture from a file and apply it to my model, right? I need to have a texture slot. So I need to click this new button. Notice I can't just select a texture. And by the way, there's different ways of getting textures. You can make a texture here live. I can do it in Photoshop and load it in. I can also make something that's procedurally generated, like an algorithm that creates a texture for me that I can sample. So there's lots of things you can do. Here, we're just going to do it the basic, which is just loading up a file that I've downloaded from texturescom. Let's do that together. So I'm going to click, again, I'm clicking on this object to the right. I'm in object mode. This is important. Where I do it. And I'm below the materials tab. I'm in the textures tab, and I'm clicking new. It's going to ask me, once I make a new texture, it's going to ask me for the name of the texture, which I'm just calling texture. We can always change this later. Don't worry about this right now. The other one is it says, what kind of texture do we want? We have one that says image or movie. There's also blend. So we want to make a texture that blends with another texture. Some kind of clouds, which is procedurally generated. Some kind of distorted noise, and a bunch of other stuff. What we care about is this image or movie, which we can use as a texture, okay? On the bottom in the settings area here, we click open. And now we're gonna point to the texture that we downloaded from either eCentennial, or in my case, I downloaded from textures.com. So click open, and I'm gonna swim to my downloads folder where I have my texture, right? So I wanna get that texture that says, and again, these are PNGs. So notice that these are able to be seen, but my other texture, which is a TIFF, is right here. Here's my TIFF, right? So I just clicked on textures.com wall, stone, 3x3, 1K thing, and I'm gonna click open image. So I found my image at 6 megs and open it up. And now it gives me a sample of what the image is gonna look like. It hasn't been applied yet. All I've done is I've created a texture slot, like a code block, that I can apply to my object. So right now, there's nothing that's been brushed. By default, it's all the same texture everywhere. Okay, and we can't see it. Remember, we can't see it because in our viewport isn't using the proper shading for us to see it. Let's turn on the right, some different shading. If I go here, you can see this is flat. But if I go right to the right, then if anything was applied to my object, and again, you can see that how I want to see the render pass, right, as an example. If I want to see what it looks like, I can choose different kinds of shading options on the top right corner. This is important because otherwise we'll never see the shader. All right, so again, you can see that it says, well, how do I want to see it? This is my viewport shading. I can choose that as a shader. And you can see that right now, I just see a little bit of shininess come in where I didn't see it before. And the reason for this is because now I've turned on lighting, so I can see what the effects of my lighting are going to be in shadow. Don't see my shape, my image, my texture, because remember, I've just loaded it in and I haven't done anything with it. And on the bottom where it says mapping, if I go to mapping, you can see that it says my my extension is to repeat, right? I can do a bunch of stuff. And how I do sampling, it talks about how to do the sampling and the filter type that I'm using and all that kind of stuff. I'm not going to mess with this. These are just other additional features that you can use. I can also do other things like flip it and a bunch of other stuff. For now, though, you can't see the effects of this because we haven't applied it. Okay. So, yes, so here's my material. And what I want to do is I want to apply this material. This material already has a texture, but it hasn't been unwrapped. Okay. So again, let's go back to UV editing mode. So here's UV editing mode, and I want to go into a tab into edit mode. Again, in order for us to see it, we have to change our viewport shading mode on the right in order for us to see the texture, because right now there is no texture. All right. On the top now in UV editing mode, what I can do is I can choose that texture, which is this texture right here. And you can see that this is the texture that I want to use, this wall. Okay. This is the wall texture I want to use. And again, if I go to the right and if I press unwrap and just press unwrap, then it says one thing, it says object has non-uniform. Let's try that again so you can see it. Object has non-uniform scale. Unwrap will operate on non-scaled version of the mesh. Right, so that's the one thing to note, right? Non-uniform scale. All right, so we have the material, right? And on the bottom, we don't see the texture because we're in edit mode. In edit mode, you won't see the texture. The texture is only available and connected to the material, right, from object mode. Let's go back to object mode 1 second. Let's go back to object mode here. Object mode. All right. So notice on the bottom, it says, let's go back to viewport display. So we have a color, we have custom properties here, and so on. But on the texture itself, and again, where it says colors, right? So there's some options here, right? We have some options. We have the texture, we have custom properties, the ramps, and all those kind of things that we have here, right? And all I want to do is I want to be able to see this texture, this thing called texture, and that's how this is what it says here. It's just texture. This is the texture slot that I have right here. So I've added the texture, and I want to be able to see this preview on the model, right? Again, if I go back to the regular model here, you'll never see it. Here, we see a little bit of texture, but if I hover over, it tells you what it is, options-wise, right? These are all the options, right? And over here, it actually adds lighting and everything else. We can do a render pass that's combined with lights and everything. So that's what we need to be up here, right? So I'm just showing you the things that will help us see the object, all right, that we've unwrapped. And then what we want to do is we want to make some, we want to select some options, right? So this is using nodes. And notice when I look at the nodes options, right, here's metallic and specular and a bunch of other stuff. One thing that we want to do is using nodes is that it really doesn't show that there's a node for the textures. There, you can see that there clearly isn't a texture node here, right? If there's no texture node, and what nodes are is a way of putting together your shader. Right now we have base color and subsurface and everything else, but when it comes to the texture itself, it's not showing us. We can also change, we can always change our shader type from principal BSDF to another type. For example, I want to go to diffuse. I can choose to the diffuse model, right, which is a little different than what we've seen before, right? So that's something that we can do, right? And remember we talked about here, there's volumes, there's no volumes, right? And we can decide on a volume that we're going to use as well. And here's the preview. And we can see that here you can actually see what the material would look like, right, as an example. And you can clearly see that there's been no texture assigned to this material. This is the way to do it. Again, if I go back into this, and even though I've unwrapped the material. So if I go unwrap, and if I, let's say, for example, I do smart UV project, and here's where it kind of layers things on top. We're not seeing the texture here because our material doesn't show it on this side. Okay, so we're just going through the process with you, so bear with me, one step at a time. Okay. If you guys are confused about anything, I'm going to go do this all again in a bit. So just bear with it while we get into this. Okay, so that's this is our normal. A normal is our normal coordinate, and we can. One thing to note is when I click normal, as an example, this is default. And one thing I can use for texture coordinate is generated or UV. If I click UV, that's what I want. I want the UV. You can see something has changed, right? Once I clicked my texture coordinate for UV, and I decide on, that's for in the normal space by itself, by the way, then that's what we get. We can always undo that change. So if that's not doing it for us, I can undo, right? And I can go back and redo our principle. Instead of diffuse BSDF, we can go back into the other one just for a second. Just go back into this one. So you can see still that we have a, somehow something has changed. Whenever we change that node, we went into that option there. As soon as we did this, we saw something change in the texture space. So here we noticed that I unwrapped, but we saw a funny, kind of dithering, if you will, on the right hand side. That's just an effect of this. Now let's go back to again principal BSDF to see it. So again, this is using nodes. This is no nodes. Using nodes, no nodes. And down in here where we have our normal right now, right? We can see that in the normal space we have this texture UV, but only on the normals. So that's not where we want it. We want it on the color, right? That's what we want it. On the base color, we want to be able to apply this option. So again, if I go back here as an example, and we can try different things. One is UV map. So this is a UV map where it actually connects with the UV map, and then it changes our normal. So this is just our normal itself, all right? So again, if you think about this, we can also click remove, right, which takes it away. Okay, that's how we did that. Let's add in this to the base color. So again, going back to the base color instead. And again, you can see that I've got a bunch of options, attributes here as well. But what I want to do is I want to add, onto our object some kind of texture. All right. Now, again, for the people that are watching, can you guess how I would do that? So again, I'm going to go back from principal BSDF to just a regular diffuse. So something that's a little simpler because there's a lot less nodes. There's only like 3 nodes here. So here's 3 nodes, right? So here's my base color, right? And again, I'm going to scoop back out to object just for a sec. So here's my base color, and I've got a material, right? And my material has a texture. Here's my texture, right? As an example, right? And there's a preview of what it looks like. Here are my settings, right, for my texture. And then when it comes to mapping, the extension says, first of all, it's 1-to-1, right? And it says repeat. That's fine. I want that to repeat. But here's sampling. It says filter type is EWA, and there's interpolation. That's fine. Everything's okay, right? But how can I add this texture so I can see it over on the other side? Remember, it's an effect of the bitmap. All right, so I've got the bitmap on here, and I want to be able to apply it in a node on the right hand side. Any thoughts? What do you think we can do? Again, I'm asking the people that are online here if you got a thought. I'm also looking at the stuff on the right. Right. So again, if I click onto base color, you can see that there's no option in where I'm not using nodes, right? And I don't see an option here for settings. So you can see that this is the color space is RGBA, alpha is straight. As an example, you can see that there's nothing that changes on the model. All right. So again, we see this as well, and this, nothing is changing here when it comes to those kind of things. And sampling. Sampling is where we get our filter type. We can choose different ones, like we said. So this isn't it. What we need to do is to do a mapping on the material, right? This is where we actually add it. So going back to nodes now, I want to add a texture node. I want to add a texture node. And again, notice that by default, it says my normal. There's options for texture coordinates. Texture coordinates is generated, normal, UV, object, camera, window, and so on. If I go to generated, it gives me this weird shape, right? Gives me this weird thing. And we're talking about on the normal, right? We want it on the color node, right? So again, we want to kind of feed into the color node from the normal. By the way, if you want to see what these nodes look like, let's just go and disconnect for a second. If you want to see what these nodes look like, then so you can see that there's shading, and the shader is talking about what we've got. We've got this is what the nodes look like right here. So we have some kind of metallic output. I'm going to just zoom in so you can see it. And we have from a regular thing, here's our texture coordinates. And what I want is, and then how did I get this? I went to shading on the top. This is shading. And what I need to do is I want to grab my UV and connect it to my color somehow. But notice that the colors are different. So here I've got a little yellow dot, and here I've got a purple dot, right? So I can't just do this, right? If I do, weird things happen, right? I get like this really weird stuff from normal to color. So now I'm getting all the normals. That's what it looks like. And if I go back to back to layout again, you can see that I got all those colors. But those colors are really the colors of the normal. So depending on what I'm looking at, take a look. So z-axis is blue. The x-axis, the objects on the x-axis are red. And the objects on the y-axis, the faces on the y-axis or facing the y-axis are green, right? So that's kind of a reflection of that. And on the right, as you can see, that there is a color, and you can see that the texture coordinate is of normal type. That's the normal that I've connected. Let's go back to that, the shading area there. So going back to this, we can actually click on the link here and disconnect, right? So I can, I don't want this to be the case. We can actually grab this and just, kind of disconnect it, right? So there's nothing there. What about if I pick the UV, and I connect it to color? So I want UV to color. There's a UV directly to color. Well, there's no UV right now, right? So that is something we don't have. What about if we did something else, like a texture? Again, I'm just using some basic nodes. I want you to think about it like, here is my shader program, and I've got inputs and I've got outputs. Here's the output to my surface, my volume, and my displacement. And here's the inputs to color, to roughness, and to the normal. I'm using this simple diffuse BSDF because the principal one is pretty long, right? Okay, what about if I was to add a new, I can do this by pressing add. Notice on the top here, when it comes to nodes, I can click add, and I can look at different input nodes, all right? So far we have a texture coordinate, right? And I want to be able to bring in, the texture itself. So here's the texture. So I've got a brick texture, and I got this image texture that I can put in place. Here's my image texture, and I can select the texture that I have. So this is the one that I kind of have. And notice that I have an output from my texture that matches the color, right? So again, all I've done is I've gone to add, I'm in shading. I'm seeing this little map down here, which is my nodes, right? This is our shader right here, right? And I've got different properties, color, roughness, and normal. And on the left, I've got my texture coordinates, and I monkey with those. But now I have this other thing called my texture image, and I have color. And if I take the color image out and I connect it to my color, now suddenly I'm seeing something else up here. Now I'm starting to see the shape of my texture, my little brick texture that comes up here. It's not right because of my weird UV mapping, but I can actually see it. And I had to do that through the nodes. Now, in previous versions of Blender, I didn't have to do this the same way. Just want to show you this so you can see it, okay? So again, I went into shading, and let me go back into layout again. And let's take a look and see what we've got in layout and how that worked. So notice in layout now, I can see the texturescom 1K albedo. is right here. So this is what I'm looking at, right? So under there, I can see textures, and then I can see the image texture that I went to. And in my image texture, it's actually selected automatically for us. Okay. So that's the way we can do it. If I go to use nodes, if I click off use nodes again, bad things happen. We'll go back to this. The only way you can get the material panels if you're in object mode. I'm going to do this all again, guys, in 1 second. And I got to do this a couple times because I want you guys to get the flow of all this. It's all new to everybody, right? So I don't want this to be something that, you're messed up about. Let's start from scratch, okay? So I'll do this one more time. If you're already there, hold where you are right now, and I'll show you one more time, okay? Remember that I have my texture on my file locally, so I can get it again. And I haven't done much. I'm just talking about difference between materials and textures and stuff. So let's start over. Remember, we can always start over. So Control-N starts us over in general form. I don't want to save anything. I'm back to my cube. I don't have a material. I have a material, but I don't have a texture. Let's modify my cube again like we did before. This time I'm just going to bring up the panel and just do it the way I want to, right? So again, what I want is for me to multiply my Z by 2.5 times. So it grows to 5 meters. That's all I've done. So if you're there, hold. Don't do anything. Don't do this again. I'm going to also move this up by 2.5 meters, just like we did last time. So this is what we did with the shape. I did it last time by using the controls on the left-hand side. Here I'm doing it again on the right-hand side. So I'm just reshaping my mesh. This is my object. We have a material on the right. The material by default is called material. Okay, that's what it's called. We can rename this later if we really want to. And now what I want to do is add a texture slot. On the right, we don't have a texture slot. The texture slot will be related to this material that's been selected. If we had more than one material, I'd have to select the material and then add a texture. Let's add a texture slot to this material. Click New. And what I do, I need to load my image. I never did this yet because I started my new file. So I'm going to click Open. Just like I did last time, I'm going to go to my Downloads page and scroll down to where I see my image, which is down here, which is texturescom, and press Open Image. Now I've loaded my image, but it doesn't appear here. Even if I change my rendering, my viewport shading on the top right, it doesn't appear because I haven't connected it. So I got to go back to my material, right? And again, I haven't done any unwrapping or anything. I showed you unwrapping, but I haven't done that. And I need to change my object. I need to connect it to the base color of my object. Here I'm keeping principal BSDF this time around, just so that way you can see the difference. If I click on this, nothing happens. I see a color. What about if I click the link though? This little node on the left-hand side, which is a little yellow node we saw last time. So I click a little yellow node, and on the left I can see image texture. Let's click on this image texture here. Now it's giving me an option. It's black because I haven't selected an image. On the left, I can actually select the one that I loaded. So I can select this one. And now if there's anything, it's going to come up like this. This is the exact same process, but I did it in a few steps as opposed to monkeying around looking everywhere. This is not right though, however, because you can see that this is stretched and this is not. Why? Because our UV is disproportionate. Our UV mapping, if I go back to my UV editing mode, you can see that this is not looking like this. All right. So again, UV editing on the top. I went from layout to UV editing. This is just selections around the top. And now you can see that you can't even see it here. The only way you can see it is if you click on this little viewport shading on the right. Actually, there's a couple ways to do that. If I keep selecting all these things, even this one is okay. This one adds lighting. All right, so this one mixes lights in. We cared about it being unlit, so this is perfectly fine as well. This one, where it says viewport shading on. So you can see that this is what it looks like unlit without the blending of lights adding into the scene. But this is clearly wrong, right? Because we have the top of my object looks okay. So if I press Control Tab and go to Face Select Mode, or if I click Face Select Mode up here, and I right click on the top face, you can see that this is okay. All right, I mean the proportions anyway are the same as these proportions. But this is clearly not okay, right? So there's a couple of tricks here. And one trick that I like to use is putting this, like I told you guys last time, in an orthographic view. This might be solving a lot of the problems that we're going to see here. And we're going to see a lot of these problems if you're going to try and shade or whatever an object somewhere else. Okay, especially if it was a complex object like our tile that we made last week. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move into orthographic mode by choosing one of these little widgets on the top here. If I choose X, then it goes into orthographic projection to the right. You can also get there by pressing the 3 on the numpad key. If I want to switch to the front projection, I can choose the 1 on my numpad key, or I can just press this button again. So I can just choose these buttons and it'll switch from one side to the other side. Okay, so here you can see that I'm in right orthographic projection. Right orthographic projection. Okay, why am I showing you this? Because, my friends, what I want to do is I only want to select this face. So I want to go to this face select mode here, and I want to select this face. So this face right here, okay? By going into the right orthographic projection. You can see that this is clearly not right. I haven't selected the other faces. The other faces are all unselected or deselected, if you will, okay? Now I want to unwrap that one face. And if I press U for unwrap, and I go, if I do project from view, then all of a sudden it becomes the right size, right? It becomes the right size. It becomes the right proportions. It's not quite the same size that it was before, but you can see it's clearly the right proportions now. Cool. Let's do the other sides. So now I'm going to move to this side, right? So again, I'm moving from my right. Again, this is my right orthographic projection. I'm going to click on this little button here. I'm going to switch over, and it says to the back, my back orthographic projection. Okay, let's see what the back looks like. I'm going to right-click on this face or select it. Here's my face. And then what I want to do is I want to unwrap project from view. Now, it puts it in the same slot, the same space as the other one. And what I can do here on the left, if you want to show them separately, because they're right on top of each other right now. You can't tell, but it's in the same spot. I can tell you right now. So remember, I can select this on this side, and I can select on this side. So if I select on this side, if I go to select all, this one, then I can use these little buttons on the left to move my island. This is what this little thing is, anywhere I like. And wherever I move it, I'm sampling from this part of the texture. I'm sampling from this part of the texture, which means I'm taking the pixels from here and I'm applying them one-to-one to the pixels on this side. Okay, let's click that little button again. So click the little button again, and now I'm on the left orthographic view. So I did right, back, and now I'm doing left. I'm going to deselect all from this side. So again, I'm going to select none. I'm going to select this face again. There's my face. And then I want to do the same unwrap, project from view, which is going to put this back in the same spot. Again, I don't want it overlapping these other ones. Let's just move it around. So I'm just going to, just to show you, I'm going to select all, this one, and let's move it somewhere else. We know that this is somewhere else like this. Okay. And we'll see how this works out, and we'll pull them all together later if you want to see that. Okay, how they kind of wrap together, if you will. And they need to kind of make sense because this is a brick pattern, right? This is a brick pattern, and then if I move them apart, then the left side of the brick and the right side of the brick will look weird. You probably won't be able to tell, but it's, not quite right. Okay, cool, let's check it again. So now that we did the right, the back, the left, let's do the front. So now you can see this is the front orthographic projection. I'm going to right-click this face or click this face. You can clearly see this is wrong. I'm going to press U for unwrap, project from view. It puts it in this place. I'm going to select all, and I'm going to move this somewhere else, somewhere on this side. Again, you can see that it's sampling from here. Even if you zoom in here and you can see it, you can see that clearly this little line here is this little line up here. See that? Look, you can see that this line is this line. It's sampling the pixels from here and applying them to the model over here. All right, that's fine for now. And let's do the top as well. So again, for the top, I'm going to press the Z button up here on the top. So this is flipping me to the top of the model. I'm going to right-click to select this one. This is okay. But we still want to project from view because this is way larger than the other ones. So again, I'm going to press unwrap and project from view, and you can see clearly that this is where this is going, right? One thing I did was I zoomed in, and whatever I zoom, my zoom level is going to be the level that I click, I get my my model, right? So you're going to see that again. So this is okay, but let's move this somewhere else. So again, we're going to be on this side. I'm going to select all, and I'll move this somewhere down here so that we can see the difference with all these islands. One more time, I'm going to select the bottom. So Z is one part. I want to select, this is my front. I want to select the bottom of the Z, right? So the bottom. And now you can see that on the left here, it says bottom orthographic. Again, I'm going to right click and select this one. And I'm going to press unwrap, project from view. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this object and move it somewhere else on the bottom left, just so that I give myself room for all these different things. I've just moved them around. You can't see them, but I moved them around so they're different. So it's sampling from different places. Good and bad. Okay, we'll talk about the good and the bad. Now let's put this back to normal. So this is where it normally looks like, right? And let's select all. Select all. Now you can see that these are all the islands that I've got. Take a look. So these are all the islands. This one and this one looks bigger than these ones. But one thing to note is this one, this one, this one, and this one are all proportional. They're all proportional. They're not unwrapped and they're not connected. And this is a problem for us because what's happening is, if you notice, if I turn this thing to the right, this one may or may not connect with the other one. And you may have some really weird patterns. They're also huge. Like notice the whole wall is like one rock. And I don't want it to be this big. I want it to be smaller. How do I do that? Well, now that I have all this selected, leave it all selected. And on the left, you can move individual islands around so that they match what you're looking at. Okay? So it's clear that all these walls match. So this is example, remember this was the right, and then we went over here, and this was the back. This was the left, and this was the front, right? So back and front should not connect, which is good. They shouldn't be together, all right? And I'm just showing you how I'm doing this. What I can do is I can deselect these ones, and what I can do is I can move these together. So just like the same selection techniques that I did here, I can use the same selection techniques over there. So if on the left, if I click box select mode, I can select which one I want on the left, and then I can move it over so that it touches, and I can go very close, very, very close. So you can see it, so that it touches I can share vertices with one and the other. So now I'm kind of connecting these two together. Let's do the same thing with this one. And it's important that we do this so that once we have this, then we'll have a shape of what we're looking at, right? These should kind of be all together anyway. The top and the bottom, we're going to make these different in a second. Okay, so now let's do this one. So again, deselect all and grab all this one. And we're just going to move this one closer so that by eye, it just overlaps. Again, you can zoom in here so you can get a really good view of it. It doesn't have to be perfect because, you know, you're not going to see it anyway. And the same thing goes this one. So again, deselect all, click B for B select, box select. I can move this over. I'm using the selection where it says box select to do that. And then just move this over nice and nice. It's like a little, it should be relaxing for you guys. There shouldn't be any stress involved. I find that anytime I do any kind of artwork and then programming, the artwork surprisingly relaxes me compared to the programming. So cool. So now I have all of these and they're connected. Why is this good? Because now they look like the same brick that's connected from one side to the other. Okay. Don't care so much about the top brick, but let's see where that top brick is. Is it the top one? That's the top brick. All right. That's okay. So I want to grab this top brick now and bring it to one of these things. I'm probably going to put it right here, right? That's where I want it to wrap together. So I'm going to use box select mode, select this one, and I'm going to bring it over on the top. Notice how it's differently proportioned, but that's okay because we can change these little islands that we make to make them the same size, right? So again, let's scale it in. We're going to scale it. I can scale it across one side or the other, right? I can change it. And I can also use numeric transformations, right? Just by pressing the N key, it'll come up with the actual image itself. So I can transform it numerically, even though I messed up the viewport earlier. I can adjust it by selecting, let's just do it separate for now. I can select only one side and push it this way. I can do a lot of different things. Let's try this out. So notice these are the UV vertex deselect. I can select one side, and then I can just choose to move this side closer in. So why am I doing that? Because I want this to be the same size. Notice that the On the X width, the width is 0.529, right? As an example. And by the way, once you have this, if I grab an object, right? So if I grab an object like this one, right? And if I look at the width is 0.417, right? So just letting you know on the x-axis, and 0.613 on the y-axis, right? So again, what I want is going back to this, deselect all, select this. You can see clearly that the width is 0.474. So that's the x on both sides. And what I want to do is I want to make the y the same 0.474. What if I did that 0.474? What happens? Well, it actually puts it down here. This is the x and y coordinates. Let's undo that change. That's what this is. So this is the actual x coordinates of what we're talking about here, 0.474. Again, we're going to try our best to make it. One thing we can also do, this is amazing, we can also play with this object as much as we want. If I press on R for rotate, I can also rotate this object across the z-axis as much as I want. So I can, pull this object to rotate it, right? So I can say, so let's say I'm going to use a box select mode, and I'm going to rotate. I can rotate the object so that it kind of looks, like what I'm seeing here, which is I can align the size of the object both on one side and the other, right? So I can do it like that as well. I'm not going to. I'm just going to eyeball it for now because it's not that important. And let's just do that by getting the top part and making it as squarish as possible. Remember, guys, you're not going to be able to see it anyway because we're not looking at things from the top and the bottom at the same time. Chances are. But obviously, this is not optimal. We don't want to do this modification for every single view. We want to keep the view that instead of me modifying the view perspective over here, we should have kept it the same. But we didn't, which is okay. We got into this a little bit too. All right, so cool. Let's deselect all and just select the top face now and pull that down so it kind of looks as squarish as possible. I think that looks pretty good. Now that I've got that, I can select all of it and I can connect it as best as possible to the shapes that we have here. Now, why am I doing this? Because I want this seam here to be the same as the other one. Great thing is once I have one, which is this one, then I can always create the other. So I can grab this one. I know this is the top one, and I can bring this alongside it. Again, remember, it doesn't really matter. We can't put that up here. It's got to go on the bottom. That's where it's going to go, right? But I can at least kind of square off each of the sides. So again, going to go very close here, and I'm going to bring it so that it kind of aligns with this side over here. I'm just eyeballing it for now. And on the right, we can just do a box select mode, B for box select. I'm going to bring this in so you can see that that matches on this side, right? And what I want to do is, and by the way, you can always find each of these islands, on your own. This is the island on the top if I want to, and if I select all, you can see all the islands selected here. Okay, so you can always select, deselect, and select the ones you want. So now I can just move that one so that it is approximately the same size. And again, we're just going to move it so that it is just sitting on top of the other one for now. And what I want to do is deselect all and select the top face here. And just move it so that it is approximately the same. And again, this is by eye. It's not perfect by any means. We're going to make it perfect later in another way, right? One thing to note now is if I try and deselect, I'll also get these other ones. And I don't want these other ones. I just want this one. So I'm going to deselect here, just select the bottom face. And then what I want to do is just move that one way down here. So again, move that way down here so it's not colliding anymore with any of the other ones. And then turn this one back on so that I can see where it's going to go. Otherwise, I would have selected the same side over here. Again, it's just a strategy. Everyone has a different way of doing things, and if the result might be the same. All right. So let's move this over. And again, I'm just moving the island so that way you can see what the effect is going to be later on. I'm going to connect this one as best as possible. Sorry, I keep on slipping here. Connect this one as best as possible to these and just make an adjustment so that they're as good. So that's what it looks like. So you got the top and the bottom and you've got the sides. And now I've got a shape that kind of looks like what we had before, that T, that really weird T that we did when we unwrapped the box. Now that we've got this, I can select all. So I can go here and select all. And what I want to do is I can move everything together, right? Now that I've selected all, I can move this whole thing and you can see what it looks like. I definitely want to make this a lot larger. And this is going to be where you freak out a little bit, but I'm going to scale it up. So again, if you look at the scale option, I can scale up by both one way or the other, right? We don't want to scale manually. Let's undo those changes. Instead, what I want to do is I want to scale together, right? And I want to scale. So now take a look, keep track of what it looks like on the right, because this is our guide. What will these blocks look like? That's the important part. So the bigger I make my object, because my image is repeating, it's an image that is more like a tiled image, right? Because my image is repeating, then my block is going to look similar, right? So it's going to, as I move this higher, then what's going to happen is this block is going to continue to be smaller and smaller. The texture is going to appear smaller and smaller until it looks exactly like how I want it. So let's do this now. So again, I'm going to kind of click in the middle and then keep pulling it off. Keep your eyes on the right until you find the right size. I think that's probably right. I'm going to also try and line up my texture so that the bottom of my texture hits the bottom of these bricks. And one side of the texture, instead of it being like this, I'm going to try and say one side of the texture. Again, remember that this is the right side, the back side, the left side, and the front side. Let's align the front of my texture with the right side of, or the right side of my UV map with the right side of my texture as closely as possible. There we go. Now, if I do this, you can see that on my object, it looks fairly good. There's a bit of weirdness on the top, but that is normal because of the way we've done it. And there's a bit of weirdness going to be on the bottom. Most likely, we're not going to see the top of the bottom anyway. What we're going to see is this continuity of brick around the outside, as you can see. So you can see that the bricks are the same and they kind of connect from one side to the other side. All right, so it's like one brick, okay? And again, if you don't like the size of these bricks because they look too big, we can just keep scaling until you've got the right look and feel. And let's do that. Let's say, for example, you can make it so that there's more bricks. Again, I encourage you to try and align at least the bottom and the side to one side, because this is something that we're going to try and make it so that it aligns on the right. I mean, it still worked as best as possible, but it's pretty good. So now we can move it, right? We can move it by, kind of putting it to the bottom right corner. Again, all I'm doing is trying to align as best as possible to this repeating texture. And you're going to see that you can have a few better results now all over the place. It's not perfect by any means. There's some problems on the top, and this looks like it needs to be rotated because the way that I captured it, and that's okay. All right, that's all it needs. The top needs the rotation because these bricks are clearly should be over here. And we can do that, right, by rotating the top and the bottom options. So again, if I go to deselect all and I select my top, so this, then I can rotate this by 90 degrees. So rotate it. So I can select all, rotate it by 90, right? And you can see that if that's not right, you can see the effect of the bricks, right? That looks still not quite right. Let's keep rotating it. So again, rotate it by 90. And one more time, rotate it by 90. And that looks like it's as best as I'm going to get. Actually, maybe, I don't know, I kind of like the other way better. Okay. That might be probably not bad. It's still off because we did it by hand and everything else, but it's okay. But you can see that's what's happened here. So again, all I've done is rotated this block, and you can do that by rotation or using the R key and rotate. Okay, this is enough. So I finally got everything we have, and from a time perspective, we want to move into Unity. We've done the Blender hour in a bit, and I want to move this over into Unity, and I have this mesh. Okay, now I'm going to go back to you guys. Are you with me? Did you guys, some of you follow along? Check mark if you're with me. X if you totally couldn't do it, or if you did it differently, that's okay. But I see there's only a couple people there who will follow around. Remember that this is not required. I don't expect you guys to do any texture mapping or anything like that. However, you may find models online and you may be tempted to try and fix them, and you won't know how to fix them or make them look really good in Unity unless you know how to do some of this. Okay, so again, I'm just showing you how to do this here. Okay, we're going to move out of this mode. Thank you for the feedback. We're going to move out of this mode here and move back into layout mode. So layout mode, it'll look like this. And let's move into an unlit. This is the unlit line. This is the unlit brick. This is what it's going to look like potentially in Unity. All right, normally what I would do is on texture.com. So if I go back to texture.com, this one, I might download the UV map, the normal map as well, or the displacement map, or the roughness, or whatever. I'm not going to do that here today. I'm just going to use this. I'm going to make a normal map from this object in Unity. It's a quick way of doing it in Unity. So I've downloaded this, and I'm going to do this now. So let's put this shape up online. One thing I don't need, let's rename this from cube to pillar. Okay. And I don't need the light and the camera to come into Unity because I'm going to have a light and a camera already. So let's get rid of light and get rid of camera. And now I only have my pillar on the right-hand side. Okay, so only got my pillar on the right-hand side. Now I'm ready to save this little thing as a model that I can bring into Unity. And I'm going to share this model with you by putting it up on eCentennial. Let's save it. So File, and we're going to click on Save As, right? And I'm going to use this blend. We're going to call this pillar. Again, it's another asset we made, right? And this pillar.blend, I'm going to put into directly into my directly into the thing. Oh, one thing to note before we save. Sorry, before we save. One more thing. Almost forgot this thing. On the bottom, in the texture area, there is a little envelope. So again, I'm looking at I'm in object mode. I'm in material and textures. And on the bottom of the texture area, you see this little, what looks like an envelope in here. So under settings, there's a little, like, I don't know, maybe a box. It looks like a box. Click that box, guys. Click this box. This box means that you're going to bundle the texture along with the model, right? Otherwise, it won't be bundled together, and you're going to have to do some fancy footwork in Unity, right? Other things to note, because we forgot to do this last time, is right now what my model is, it's scaled. I want to apply all the transformations. So before we save it, we can do this. Even after we save it, we can do this again. So the way to apply the transformations is to search for apply, and you can see where it says apply all transformations. That's what you want to do. Or you can press Control A while you're in object mode only in object mode, not in edit mode. And then I can say all transformations. And what this does, when I go back to numeric transform, you can see that the scale now is 1, but my dimensions are 5. So it's almost like this is the original scale of the object, and it's not a transformed scale, which is really good because it's going to come out in Unity a little bit better from a lighting perspective than it would be. There you go. So there's my object. Let's now save it. So all I did was press Control A and apply all transformations. All right, let's save it now. File, save. It's going to put it in the right spot. I'm going to go into my desktop and into Centennial and into COMP397 and my project 3A. And I'm going to go into assets and go into models. And I'm going to call this pillar.blend. Pillar.blend. And then click Save Blend File. And at the same time, I'm going to put this up on eCentennial. So I'm going to go to eCentennial to help you guys out so you don't have to do all that work. And under where my course lecture is, I'm going to add that in. I'm going to say new and file. And I'm going to say pillar.blend. Create a file. Actually, let's see if I can drag and drop it in. Yeah. Maybe upload file. My computer, I'm going to click on my project folder. Here's my project folder, assets. And yeah, here it is. Here's my pillar.blend. And I'm just going to pull this in so you guys can have it up here and add. And now you have my pillar.blend on eCentennial. Please download this if you couldn't do it on your own. And so you can at least play with it in Unity, which is the next part we're going to do. Okay, let us kick off Unity to finish off this video. And to do that, I'm going to go to Unity Hub, and I made a brand new file. I'm going to click Add, and I got to select the new one. So I'm going to go to Desktop, Centennial, and I'm going to go to 397 and 3A and click Select. And what this is going to do is going to show up our little new file here in Unity Hub. And then I'm just going to click on it to make it to launch. And everything should go well as normal. Okay. If you give it a sec, then you're going to see that this comes up in Unity. So again, I've been out, guys, bear with me. This is like, we're not going to do this all the time, but I need to do a little bit of it with you so you understand a bunch of stuff that's going on. It's not enough for us to just use an object that we download from the asset store. It's far better for us to understand when we get an asset from the asset store, what's in it. Okay, like how is it composed? So right now, if you look at the models folder, you can see that I have a pillar that I have here. Here's my pillar. And I'm going to open up my scenes. We don't see the scene that I had here last because it's inside of scenes, main. And if you look at the main scene now, if you double click on scenes main, you're going to see that this is the project that I've given you so far online, right? And it's completely untextured. This is what we did before. Later on, if we have a chance, not today, but I challenge you, try and apply the texture to this model and see what the challenge should be to do that. Okay. In the meantime, let's pull in that new object. So in models, we have our pillar. On the right, we have a model. And notice that it looks like the pillar that we worked with in Unity, but there's no texturing. No texturing. So we want to definitely put on, so on the model, when we clicked on the pillar, we want to go down where it says Generate Colliders and click it, please. That's the first thing. The next is Generate Light Map UVs. Click this little button and then click Apply. This is going to make our model usable when we bring it into Unity. Okay. The other thing we want to do is on the top where we go to Materials. Notice where it says Materials and it says Extract Textures. Well, we don't have our textures, but we're going to bring them in. So let's bring in the texture file. The textures for it to work properly have to be in the same folder or thereabouts. We can use them. So let's get textures. In the textures, let's grab that texture that we just downloaded from the from texturescom. So I'm going to grab that texture and drag and drop it off screen in our Unity project. It's going to convert it, and now instantly it textures it. Why? It knows about this texture, and the model is searching for this texture to come online. All right, pretty cool so far. We've got our texture. You can clearly see what the model is going to look like when we bring it into Unity, but so far it's inside of our models folder. By default, our materials are embedded in the model. I want to extract the materials from our model so we can use them for other models. So let's extract materials. So extract materials. It's going to ask us where we want material to go. I'm going to go into Assets. I'm going to go into Materials, and I'm going to put it there inside, select this folder. What it's going to do is it's going to take time to extract the material and put it inside of our Materials folder. Now you can see that there's something called Material. And it looks like this. This is an example of what our material would look like, right, in Unity. It's a principal BSDF material to the most that Unity can handle for it to come in. So it looks like almost like what the object looks like as we brought it in. Let's change the material so it says what this thing is, which is a brick wall. So let's choose material, And just like we had the textures that says wall, stone wall is what it is, sorry, not brick wall. We just changed the name so it says stone wall. Stone wall. Okay, there's that stone wall material. And now what I want to do is there's a couple things. Notice on the right here, we have just the albedo is the thing that we're accessing. Think about this as the color node. This is our color node that's right in here. And what I want to do is I want to add a normal map as well as a height map. Okay, so let's do just the normal map today. So normal map, what it does, it fools the camera into thinking that there is depth on a model when there's actually not. It uses the dark areas and the light areas in the model to create the illusion of depth, all right, by changing the pixels of the color or the color of the pixels around from the sample that we're getting, okay? So it's not a displacement. We're actually not changing the model at all when I use a normal map. All it's going to do is in the normal, towards the normals, which is the direction the face of the model is pointing, right? We're going to change the object so it looks like it has depth. And this is a way of using a very low poly or low polygon object and adding detail to it without modifying the object and making it more complex. For example, if I had to model an object with all these bricks, that is it could become a very high polygon model, high polygonal model, many polygons. And a high polygon count is bad from a performance perspective because I got to make sure that each vertex and face and all that stuff. Can you imagine making all these little, like a model with all this detail? It's too much, right? So we use a texture instead. Let's bring that model in there. So I'm going to grab my pillar now and bring it in. And let's take a look and see what it looks like. So if you double click on the pillar, it's going to take you to where Unity is going to put it. Let's put the pillar on top of our tile somewhere. So let's just lift this pillar up and just move it over to one of our tiles. It's actually quite massive because of the way we had done it. This is a pretty big tile. Let's move this pillar to the right-hand side. And what we want to do is we want to move it down so that it matches to the top of the pillar. Notice that the way to look at this is on the right. We don't want to go to 2.11. We're probably going to go to up because these things, the way we made our tiles, we made them 2 meters tall, right? So that's how we did it. Okay, so there we are. So there's our pillar, and it looks exactly like we would expect. But notice that when you go closer to it, and when we play the game, we're going to make a prefab out of this in a second, it doesn't really have any, depth to it. Notice that right there. When we're in Unity, there's no depth to it, right? So let's make a prefab out of this. Again, to make a prefab, we're going to open up the resources prefabs folder and drag and drop this pillar back into the prefabs folder, like so. And it says, what do you want to do? Open a variant or make an original? Let's make an original. Okay, and now we have a prefab, right? Do I want my character to jump on top of this? Maybe. Let's make the layer the ground layer so that the player can collide with this and seem grounded and basically jump on top if they can reach this. They probably won't be able to reach it, but just in case they want to jump on the top, I'll allow them. Cool, so that is this part, but I want to add now what the character would see. So if I run it in Unity, and just for time, you can see that there's my pillar. And if I jump up on the wall, so again, I move to the wall and jump on it, and I go closer to it, you can see that there's really no depth. This is actually my character looking at the looking at the pillar, and you can see that clearly there's no depth to it. It looks just like I've added a texture, I've wrapped it around this object, and that's what it looks like. All right, so that's great. That's a good start. But what about if I wanted to add depth? So let's save this project, save, and let's put it up on GitHub so you have it too. So I'm going to go to my Gitkraken. I'm going to save the project, save, and file save project, and close it down. And then what I want to do is I want to launch. I want to do an update. So again, notice that there are 9 file changes in the working directory. I want to view the changes. These are the ones. I added a stone wall material. I also added this texturescom stone wall, albedo, and I want to stage all changes. And then down below, I'm going to say added pillar. We'll say textured pillar. That's what it is. Commit 9 changes. And then I'm going to go to, I want to push this up. So now you can have it too. Okay. Awesome. So that went up. Let's pull this up on Unity one more time and finish what we're doing here in Blender Unity. And then we'll move into the next video where I add some lighting. Okay, and talk about lighting a little before we end the day. All right, so cool. We have this. Let's bring it up. And as we bring it up, we're going to see now we have a textured pillar. And again, when you guys look at this thing, you're like, wait, what? How did he do that? I mean, you saw what the process. The process was I have a texture. I've sampled the pixels from my texture, and I've basically remapped the color of the pixel on the model. That's what I've done, right? And I've been able to change the UV coordinates so that they're proportional with the size of the model, the faces of the model. This is very key and important to do. Okay. Very good. All right, so now that we have this and we're good, we want to add depth to it, like I said before. And Unity has a great, quick way of doing this. So again, if I look at the materials folder and I look at Stonewall, on the right in the inspector, you can see that there is this one spot for albedo. That is where it's related to my texture. What if, though, I went to the texture and instead of just dragging it to albedo, what if I dragged and dropped this texture to normal map? Or if I click this little target, and if I chose the same thing, I can do that. I can actually use the target to select. I chose the same thing. And then if I press, kind of enter, it's going to give me a bit of a problem. It's going to say, wait, Tom, you've done something here. Are you sure you don't want your texture? It's working, right? Are you sure you don't want your texture, this little texture here, this on a normal map to do something? It tells me to fix it. It says the texture is not marked as a normal map. Do you want to mark it as a normal map? It's already changed, if you notice on the left-hand side. If I click fix now, it will replace my texture with my normal map. But actually what it does, it did it for both the normal map and the albedo. And this is what a normal map would look like. It kind of gives you a little bit of depth, but no color, right? So if I go back to textures, right, you see that now it's a normal map. Let's bring in that texture one more time. I already had a texture already. One thing, by the way, I could have done is if I undo, right? So let's say, for example, can I undo that texture change? Well, yeah, but now it's always a normal map. So what I need to do is, the smart thing to do is bring in the texture again. Let's rename this one. So under textures, let's rename this texture so it makes sense. We're going to say Stonewall, and then N for normal map. Okay, N for normal map. Let's bring in that texture again another time. Remember, all we did was we dragged and dropped it. So inside of our original textures, so again, on my file system, that didn't change. I made a copy of my texture. There it is in my on my file. Let's bring it in again. So bring it in again, second time. Let's rename it. So it's, instead of Stonewall N, we're just going to go Stonewall. And again, there's a different kind of things here that you can use. You can use D for diffuse, as an example, or for C for color. I usually use D for diffuse, the diffuse color, right? And then when I pick the materials, again, all I've done is bring in another copy of the same texture and rename it. One has been converted into a normal map from Unity. And the other one, which is not bad, didn't do a bad job. If I go to the material again, right, and if I click on Stonewall, then I can simply go to my textures and drag and drop this texture into my albedo, back to normal. I can select my normal one now, my normal map, and now I have something that's interesting in my material. I have both my Stonewall's color as well as the normal map aligned to it. Now, one thing is you can't really tell because what's happened is on the right, my normal map is 100% of my texture. And what we need to do is remove this or reduce this value down. So let's reduce this down. And as I reduce the normal map down, you can kind of put it down to a level where it makes sense. You want to definitely go less than 1. If you go more than 1, it becomes really dark and dismal, right? And more, basically the blacks in between the tiles become blacker, right? But what I want to do is I want to kind of make it so it's less than 100%. Go down to like something like 0. Something small, like very subtle, 0. Let's say 2 or 0.3, something like that. Even that's too much, maybe 0.25. And then we have a bit of what looks like a bump, right? A little bit of this, a little more, it looks more like a wall than it did before, right? With a little bit of the blacks shading in where the black should be shaded. Okay, one more time. We can also use a height map, the same thing. Well, we learned from the last time, so go back to textures. I can copy the regular texture, so Control D will copy the texture, Control D, or you could just right click and duplicate. All right, was what you want to do. I think it's actually, if you go to Edit on your Edit menu, you can duplicate. That's Control D in Unity. And I want to redo this, and it's going to be kind of the displacement map, right? So this is like the, if I go to, or the height map is what it's going to be. So if you look at materials, look at stone wall, there's something called height map, right? And I can just go to the textures and change the second one to H for height map. There it is. And now what I can do is in the materials, I can go to my stone wall material and select my height map and see what it does. And when I do that, it's going to say, okay, cool, but, it's not quite right, the height map. And what I can do with the height map is this will actually modify, if we have the proper height map and we don't, this will modify first of all, the information we're getting from the height map is incorrect. But you can actually modify the how much this displaces everything. So almost like a displacement map. Okay. The other option would be, right now we're looking at standard shader. We can also choose on standard specular setup. Standard specular setup makes it slightly different. It's a different kind of input, right? But for the most part, you have your main map, and you also have something called the secondary map, where you can layer one map on top of the other one. Okay, so height map didn't really do much, just deleting that. And you can see there's nothing going on here because I have to make a proper height map. If we were to, I'm just going to delete that. If we were actually going to get a proper height map, you can do that from texturescom, which I didn't do. Notice that this is what a displacement map will look like. This is what a normal map will look like. It's the same texture. All it's going to do is layer one piece of information from our pixels on top of the other one to create additional information that we can deal with. Okay. Let's go back to Unity because I think we're done for now. So let's test it and see what it looks like. So again, save the scene and then let's run it. So, and if you notice, if I jump up now, come on, how about we jump properly? And if you look at it now, if you look closer, it looks a lot more realistic than what it looked like before. It still looks pretty flat, but from far away, it looks pretty darn good, right? It looks pretty good. Pretty darn good, right? Compared to what's a little, very realistic looking wall, right? Where it fails is on the floor. The floor, I mean, this doesn't look like a very realistic floor because we don't have a texture on this thing. Then the seam, this area here between this pile and the pillar, something's wrong. Right? Like what? How is this piece of stone staying on this like blocked out area here? What do you do? Here's something to try. What if we were to take the same stone texture and apply it to everything else? How is that going to work? Is that going to map out properly? Is it going to mess up? And the answer is, yeah, it's going to mess up. But let's see what it looks like anyway. So what I mean is, we also have this other material. This other material is called ground, right? The ground material. That's the ground physics material. And there's also something called green, right? But we also have inside of our prefabs folder, we have our tile 1 and tile 2. And tile 1 and tile 2, they have a they also have textures because they have a renderer, here's our material. Our material looks like it's called material, this one. And the way to get rid of or take away this material is going back into our, because remember, these things came from this, right? We could, if I was to drag my material in here, this material, and replace it with the other one, then you're going to see a weird mapping. Let me show you what that looks like. So again, if I go back to, let's say, one of my tiles, this one, and let's replace the material that this is pointing to, this material right here, let's replace it with the material I just added in. So material, and I take stone wall, and I drag it in. That doesn't look quite right, does it? Because it's got like an inappropriate stretching going on here, because we stretched this part. So this is all stretched out, and it's not right. Let's undo that change. So we're going back to this material. But how do I extract the material that's there with all the UV information? Well, we had it already here in our prefabs in tile 1, just like before. So inside of our our models, we have tile and tile 2. Tile 1 has a material. Here's my materials. Let's extract this material now too in tile 1. So I extract the material, and then I go into my materials folder. Here's my materials. There it is. Notice when I did that, I lost the material. This is a great example of what happens when the material's been lost from the prefab, right? We're going to put it back in a sec. Bear with me. In my materials folder, we have this thing called material. We're just going to call this tile 1, right? Just so we know what it is. So we'll say tile 1. And my tile 1 material has no texture in the albedo at all whatsoever, right? So now what I can do, right, is first of all, if we connect this tile 1 to our tile 1 prefab, I want to do it in the prefabs folder. So in my tile 1, I want to choose the material. See if this is missing material. I want to choose tile 1 as the material. And now we're back to normal. Okay, because it's got the same mapping, the same UV map. All right. Great thing about this is the materials. If I go back to tile 1, and if I choose an albedo for this, I can choose one that looks like stone wall. Again, it's not going to be perfect because we didn't adjust the UV map so that it stretches, for each of the tiles. So on the right here, we didn't really unwrap things properly. We just moved them up, and that's why it looks the way it does. But you can see how that would work. We can actually map an object to a texture to an object, no problem. If we had the right UV maps, then it would be perfect, but we don't. And we can't set the UV. We can't fix the UV in Unity. We can only fix it in a program like Blender, as an example. Okay, so this just letting you know that. There's no way that I know of that you can fix it in Unity. There's also something called UV0 and UV1, right? It doesn't really matter. It's just using a channel for the UVs. You can have multiple UVs if you really want to. Okay, so that is this. All we've done here is we've extracted. It looks terrible, but I'm going to leave it like this so you can see it. And this would be one screenshot that you'd want to take for your lab 3. Okay, let's stop now and let us do the next part. I'm going to stop this video, and for the next hour, I'm going to talk about lighting, and which is what a topic of our thing is for this week. So save, file, save project. Again, you can see the messed up tiles here, but that's okay. And we're going to close off Unity. I'm going to go to Get Cracking when it's closed. And I'm going to say view changes. These are the changes I made. I'm going to stage all changes. And I'm going to say, again, adjusted tile 1's material, which is really what I did. Commit changes to 9 files. And then I'm going to go to push up to GitHub. So you should have all that, everything I've done so far up online. All right, let's stop recording now, and when we come back, I'm going to talk about lighting. I know that was 2 hours instead of 1, but sometimes we have to go slow so you understand how things work. All right, and let's stop. Right, well, I'm generally